come to men over roughly 4.5 billion years from a primordial soup of chemicals, or if we're going to go further back, 13.7 billion years for the evolution of the solar system and the world and everything in the precursor. I'm going to juxtapose that, in my view, against scientific experiment, which indicates that codes and order come from intelligence. So when I speak about evolution, I'm not talking about adaptation. I'm going to be looking at three areas in a moment, but you may be having in your mind the thought, well, what about the small changes that we sometimes do see, and often do see in the laboratory? I don't take that to be evolution. I simply take it to mean adaptation, which can occur, where creatures can adapt to their environment, and I'm not going to present that in the same way that I would speak, well, I'm not going to refer to that in the same way that I would refer to evolution. Evolution is where I'm saying that something which wasn't there beforehand actually was there later, and new function appeared. And so gradually you come from a pea soup, as you well know, to the idea of life beginning in the sea, and then the fish gradually becoming reptiles, and then reptiles gradually becoming mammals, and then mammals eventually leading to us, and some of the reptiles becoming birds on the way. We're going to look at macro design, we're going to look at intricate mechanisms, mainly to do with the human body, the first one, and the second one is a little bit wider than the human body, and then I'm going to hone in on the mind. Because last year was the Olympics, this talk rather developed around the Olympics, which is why everything sort of centres around the idea of the human body and the evidence for design in that. I want to look at the lower half of the human body, particularly the hip, the knee and the foot, to show to you that there really is evidence which is consistent with the design position. Many people try to present the view that ape-like creatures, not apes themselves, and I fully recognise that evolution of course teaches that there was a common descent to apes, to orangutans, to monkeys, basically to the simian kind and human beings. So when I say that there is a difference between the two, I'm fully aware that obviously the evolutionary position is that we have developed to, or creatures have developed to apes, creatures have developed to orangutans, etc. But nevertheless, I want you to see that there is a major difference between the simian kind, which we're supposed to have evolved from. Number one, their posture. If we're going to walk on two legs, which of course is possible for the simian kind, the apes, their centre of gravity passes not through the ear, but behind the ear. You'll see here that what I'm referring to is this line, of course, here, which is the line of the centre of gravity. It comes behind the ear, comes in front of the pelvic girdle, comes behind the knee, and of course does eventually go through the foot. But remarkably, the human being has the centre of gravity going just in front of the knee, through the pelvic girdle, and through the inner ear. We are designed, I suggest, for upright posture. Many people have tried to say, of course, that the chimp or a chimp-like creature, or some simian-like creature, I'll sometimes refer to chimps, sometimes refer to monkeys, but basically I'm referring to the simian kind, that they changed from a chimp-like creature to human beings. But one of the most major examples where people say this is the evidence of a gradual evolution from an ape-like ancestor is this famous example, which is a cast of it. The original, that is in America, but a cast of it is in Addis Ababa Museum, which is where I was just recently, and I had the privilege of seeing the Lucy display there. And it is reckoned that 3.18 million years ago, Lucy was existing as some sort of pre-ape-like creature which was in the process of becoming a human being. Drawings will show Lucy with a human foot and an upright posture. But everything indicates that this creature is indeed, as the name suggests, a southern ape found in Africa, and that it was simply an ape-like creature. when one considers the hip actually looks distinctly chimp-like, because the difference is, of course, that the chimp has a flared hip, whereas the human being has a structure for the hip such that the joints are in a very different position, which I'll show you in a moment. And everything indicated that the reconstruction from the bones of Lucy was very similar, in fact, to a chimp. This was the immediate reaction, or a few years after it had been found, in the Journal of Physical Anthropology. The fact that the anterior portion of the iliac blade, that's the blade around the hip, faces laterally in humans, but not in chimpanzees, is obvious. It's flared in chimpanzees. The marked resemblance of Lucy to the chimpanzee is equally obvious. It suggests to us that the mechanism of lateral pelvic balance during bipedalism was closer to that in apes than in humans. Now, this is the point that we really do need to understand with the posture of a human being compared with the posture of a chimp. I'll come to the foot later, which is obviously very different. The knee is different, but what I want you to observe initially is that the femur actually points inwards for a human being, such that the joint where the knee is actually slightly at an angle. It's not vertical, that joint, but this is deliberate such that the knee then comes right under our centre of gravity and under the main torso, and we are built for walking with a vertical posture. In other words, an orangutan or a chimp or any creature of the simian kind will tend to walk like this. We can't do it, of course, I can't simulate it, because their hip is actually causing their bones to be out here for the femur, and they will walk in this way. They are not wanting to naturally bring their feet together. So we need to realize that there is a very great difference between the hip of a human being and the hip of chimps, or the hip of your orangutans and so on. Now I come to the knee, and the remarkable thing about the knee is that although there are some similarities in the knee joint of an ape and the knee joint of a human being, the big difference is this, that the knee joint locks. We can actually bring our knee such that it will lock in a vertical posture. That is not the case with any of the simian kind. So when a chimp is walking, it walks in a very different way. It can walk on two legs, but it won't walk with a vertical posture in its knee, because it cannot lock the knee. And that's a very important point. The knee, yes, it has a similar cruciate ligament and all the rest of it, but it doesn't have this lockable mechanism. So if they are going to walk on two legs, we'll blow this up so you can see it and just concentrate on these two parts of the figure, it's going to actually cause a torque graph against the phase of walking as follows. Please notice that we're comparing one motion, one cycle for the human being, to one cycle for the chimp, or for a monkey it would be exactly the same. And you can see here that the hip takes most of the energy. This is torque, so it's newtons times meter, and it's the amount of torque that's going through each of the joints, the hip, the knee, and the ankle. And you can see that most of the energy in the motion of walking for a monkey is in the hip. Some of it is in the knee and some of it in the ankle, but if you notice, the only one which is in the same phase as the human being is the ankle. The other two are actually out of phase by comparison. Now we turn to the human being, and we find that most of his energy, that is the energy of walking, is in the foot here. And we're going to look at that in a moment. The foot is unique for a human being, as the lockable knee is as well. Now we come to the foot. You might have thought that that looks like a hand, but probably, as you well know, all the simian kind have opposable thumbs on their feet. Whether it be the monkey, whether it be the orangutan, whether it be the chimp, there is a massive difference. And they have the ability, of course, to grip anything as a result. They are well designed for living in the way they do, which is mainly, of course, in trees and gripping things with their feet as well as with their hands. And the big thing, of course, is now when we come to the human foot, it's totally different. We don't have an opposable thumb. We don't have anything like a bonobo monkey or an orangutan shown here. And what we do have is an arched foot arrangement with a spring attached from front to back, which is basically a ligament, which is connecting the big toe and the little toe, both to the ball of the foot. So you now have a three-pronged stability arrangement. So when I stand on one leg, you might like to try it before you go to bed tonight, you'll find that actually it's not that simple to stand on one leg, but you can do it. Why? Because you are actually balancing on effectively a three-legged stool, but with ligaments attached between all the three legs. Because there's even a ligament going across from the little toe to the big toe. And there's a ligament, as I just said, going from the little toe back to the ball of the foot, and from the big toe back to the ball of the foot. So it's a wonderful mechanism to keep balance. So when you last summer saw the brilliant Japanese and Chinese people acting on the bars in the Olympics, you know, jumping up onto those bars and being able to stand on one leg or whatever they were doing and do these cartwheels, most of them did it beautifully, they were actually using this arched mechanism on their feet. And of course, in the 100 meters, people are all trying to make sure that they get just that advantage by starting off on the front part of their feet and then running with this arched mechanism, giving them extra spring in every step. That's what Olympians have to learn. But it's unique to human beings. So when in the display in Addis Ababa of Lucy, they showed Lucy with a human foot, there's no evidence whatsoever of that human foot ever being on something like a monkey, or a bonobo monkey, or orangutan, or whatever it is that we're going to consider. Indeed, it's very interesting that when you actually look at the evidence with an impartial eye, even by their own reckoning concerning timescales, which is not what I'm speaking about tonight, I'm just taking their timescales, even though that's not my personal position. But when they looked at the famous Laetoli footprints, which are a little bit further north from Ethiopia in Tanzania, in Tanzania, you'll find that many comments, particularly at the time, were that these footprints look distinctly human. And in their terms, I don't accept particularly these dates, but they would date them even older than Lucy. And a recent paper, which only came out in 2011, which was looking at these footprints and trying to deduce how this creature walked, says, we found, however, that the Laetoli footprints represented a type of bipedal walking that was fully upright and driven by the front of the foot, particularly the big toe, much like humans today, and quite different to bipedal walking of chimpanzees and other apes. If we actually consider the evidence impartially, isn't that really just fitting with what I was suggesting to you is quite a plausible explanation of all the evidence, which is that Lucy was not actually a human on its way to a human being, it was just simply a monkey, and that these Laetoli footprints were just simply humans. And of course that raises a lot of issues as to the implications if one takes that position. Let's just now move to another point, which is the intricate mechanism. Now I'm not considering things on a large scale. I'm beginning to look at a much smaller scale. And I'm going to consider the human ear. It actually applies to all mammalian ears, what I'm going to say. But I'm going to, in particular, consider the examples of, in pictures in particular, of the human ear. But actually, I'm no longer talking about the difference between simian, that is monkey-like, and human, because monkeys also have this type of ear. But it would be very pertinent to the supposed transition of reptiles to mammals, because it is, the evolutionary position is that the reptile ear, which of course is designed mainly for listening in water as well as air, that became a mammalian ear. Now I'm going to show you what's involved. The ear is a remarkable instrument. This, of course, is the outer ear, but I want to particularly home in onto the middle ear, which is this bit here. And I particularly want to home in initially on these bones behind the eardrum. This is the inner ear, which I'll consider in a moment. This is the eardrum, which, just as it suggests, it's sometimes called the tympanic membrane, is the membrane which vibrates just like on a drum. So imagine you've got a drum, you normally hit it with a drumstick, but it's the reverse process in the mammalian ear. You've actually got the tympanic membrane, the eardrum, vibrating as a result of sound. So the sound waves are hitting the tympanic membrane, and then that tympanic membrane moves behind it 3 bones in succession. These bones are the hammer, the anvil, and the stirrup. That hammer is like the drumstick, but it's actually attached to the tympanic membrane. So as the tympanic membrane vibrates, then there is a mechanical movement of the hammer. The hammer is sometimes called the malleus. The anvil that I mentioned earlier when I spoke here is sometimes referred to as the incus, and the stirrup, because it looks like the stirrup of a horse bridle, is sometimes referred to actually more technically as the stapes. So you can see that this is the eardrum which is going to move here, so this is moving up and down. That then moves the anvil bone. Now the anvil bone, or the incus bone, is actually a dampener. So you've got a movement of the hammer, and then there is a slight damping motion from this anvil. Then that moves the stirrup, which then connects to the inner ear. We're coming to that. The actual size of these bones is so small that they would only take up a fraction of the area of a 10-cent American piece, which is about sort of 5 feet size. We call these 3 bones the ossicle bones, and the remarkable thing is that these bones stay exactly the same size from when you were born. So a baby at a few months or just a few weeks old has exactly the same size ossicles as when maybe 90 years old later that person dies. There is no difference in size. It's the only bones in the human body, and indeed in the mammalian body, which will stay the same size. We're going to now come to the cochlea. Now the cochlea is even more complicated than that. We've moved from motion in air to mechanical motion of 3 bones. Now those 3 bones are going to connect to a cochlea which is full of fluid.